General Douglas MacArthur was a legend after World War II and the Korean War. He ruled Japan like a king for many years after the war, standing next to Emperor Hirohito as an equal. But not all things are as they appear. MacArthur had a deep, dark secret that he hid from the world. Before World War II, he was assigned for the second time to the military district of Manila in the Philippines from 1928 to 1930. MacArthur had just divorced his wealthy first wife, Louise Brooks, and he took a young 16-year-old Filipino beauty as his mistress nicknamed Dimples. This relationship would ultimately end in tragedy. Isabel Rosario Cooper, who also took the first name Elizabeth, was born in Manila as the daughter of an American father from Wisconsin with a Scottish heritage and a Chinese-Filipina mother. She acted during the silent film era and made history in 1926 as the first Filipina actress to have an on-screen lips-to-lips kissing scene when she was only 12 years old. This was considered scandalous at the time. Even though MacArthur was 50 years old, he didn't let the 34-year age difference bother him. 5 months after they first met, MacArthur was appointed Chief of Staff by then-President Herbert Hoover and recalled to Washington in 1930. He wanted to bring Dimples to Washington to be with him, but he couldn't risk scandal by traveling with her, so he bought her a ticket on a later ship. As a token of his affection before leaving, MacArthur presented his mistress with a jade and diamond ring. In his letters to Cooper after his arrival in the United States, MacArthur seemed fearful that Dimples would not follow him and there was an underlying insecurity. He signed his letters, "Daddy," and wasn't too cautious in expressing his feelings. After her arrival, MacArthur arranged for Dimples to be lodged discreetly at an apartment in the Tony Georgetown district of Washington, D.C. MacArthur later moved her to the Chastleton Hotel. This hotel was an imposing Gothic Revival-style building near his office at the State, War, and Navy Building. MacArthur provided his newly arrived mistress with a poodle, presents and an enormous wardrobe of tea gowns, kimonos, and black lace lingerie. She had few street clothes, because he saw no reason why she would need to go outdoors. He told her that her duty lay in bed. He wanted her to always be there for him, waiting. MacArthur had put his paramour on a pedestal and expected her never to leave it. His expectation that she would just wait for him all alone in her apartment was unrealistic, especially for a beautiful former film star and one used to a lot of attention. MacArthur had hid his mistress from his elderly mother and had to worry about her finding out in the public scandal that might ensue. Such a revelation might also hurt his army career. People who saw Dimples at this time later described her appearance as exquisite. She was expensively and beautifully well-dressed, with her hair in braids down her back. As Chief of Staff, MacArthur had to do a lot of traveling. He would send her postcards, but she found these poor substitutes for his company. She tired of the dog and grew restless. Reluctantly, the general agreed to provide her with a chauffeured limousine. In it, she prowled the night spots of Washington and Baltimore where she seduced, among others, George Abel, a descendant of the Baltimore Sun's founder. After she convinced MacArthur to give her a large cash gift, she blew it on a vacation to Havana, Cuba. The general encouraged Cooper to enroll in school. She tried art school for a while and switched to law, where she met and had an affair with a fellow student named Frank Kenmore, who promised to relieve the monotony of her situation while he paid the bills. When MacArthur learned of this, things quickly cooled between them. Even after her betrayals, she needled MacArthur to find a job in Washington for her brother, Alan Cooper. Disgusted, he refused. Rudely sent her a help-wanted column torn from a newspaper, and hinted that she looked to her father or her brother for future support. Finally, on September 1, 1934, MacArthur had had enough and ended their illicit relationship after 4 years. He washed his hands of it by mailing her a train ticket to the West Coast and an ocean liner passage to the Philippines. He thought this would be the end of the matter, but it wasn't by far. Dimples had no intention of leaving Washington. She moved into a rooming house a few blocks from MacArthur's office. She was job hunting when she heard that a newspaper columnist named Drew Pearson was interested in digging up dirt from the general's past. In order to understand why journalists were trying to attack MacArthur's reputation, we need to roll back time and delve into what happened 2 years before. In the summer of 1932, about 20,000 World War I veterans, mainly jobless victims of the Depression, marched on Washington to urge Congress to vote for a deferred bonus for their service in the Great War. Many came with their families in desperation and camped in empty government buildings or in flimsy huts outside the city. While most of the protesters merely needed to be heard and given compassion, MacArthur regarded them all as subversives, threatening the federal government. After President Hoover ordered their dispersal, MacArthur mobilized 800 troops and evicted the veterans and their families from public buildings. At this point, President Hoover called a halt to the action, but MacArthur ignored the order and pursued them with bayonets and tear gas across the Anacostia River. As men, women and children fled in terror, MacArthur's soldiers burned the veterans' encampment of tents and shacks. To protect his own reputation, MacArthur shifted responsibility to President Hoover, whom MacArthur said had averted a very grave situation with force and vigor. Some journalists saw through this misdirection of responsibility and held a grudge against MacArthur that didn't go away with time. Columnists Drew Pearson and Robert Allen, who loved bringing down high-minded politicians, castigated MacArthur for his dictatorial handling of the veterans as unwarranted, unnecessary, arbitrary, harsh. In response, MacArthur sued Pearson, Allen, and the United Features Syndicate, which owned the rights to the Washington merry-go-round column, for libel and asked for $1.75 million in damages. The columnists received sympathetic help from Mississippi Congressman Ross Collins, who lived in a suite on the same floor of the apartment building as Cooper. Pearson discovered to his delight that Dimples had kept all of MacArthur's syrupy and impassioned love letters to her. They had found MacArthur's weakness at last. When Pearson's lawyer casually informed MacArthur's counsel at a pre-trial hearing that they would have a certain Miss Isabel Rosario Cooper summoned as witness for the defense, MacArthur promptly withdrew the case. The general paid Dimples $15,000 to have the love letters returned to him and another $15,000 to cover Pearson's legal expenses, which cost him dearly. $30,000 in 1930 would be almost $500,000 in today's money. MacArthur could have easily defeated Pearson in court had he not feared that his mother would learn about his Asian mistress. After all, MacArthur was a divorced man and single. Yet, if those letters had been revealed in public, they would have damaged MacArthur's reputation irreparably and doomed his presidential aspirations. History would have certainly turned out differently. To this day, the MacArthur estate prohibits direct quotation from the letters which reveal the schoolboy infatuation of a middle-aged man for a Filipino beauty less than half his age. With $15,000 cash on hand and MacArthur out of her life, in 1935, Dimples married lawyer Frank Kenmore, the same student she had earlier cheated on MacArthur with. They hit the road and lived in his native Oklahoma, opened a beauty salon, but they divorced in 1942. Later, she was married twice to the same Filipino-American bartender, Milton Moreno, on June 13, 1944 and then again on November 21, 1946. Apparently, both marriages ended in divorce. It seems that Cooper never had any children. She sought fame and fortune in Hollywood and tried to find work as an actress. However, the only roles that she could manage were those as an extra, such as a geisha and a Filipina nurse in films. To promote herself, Dimples commissioned portraits of her in various costumes for roles she aimed to land. A demure Filipina girl in a butterfly-sleeved Filipina outfit, a sultry Chinese dragon lady, and a flirty island girl. In 1946 she was one of Rex Harrison's concubines in Anna and the King. She was also an extra in a Charlie Chan film. In the 1947 film Unconquered, she was an unidentified and uncredited Native American. Despite being confined to bit roles, the 1950s saw her making 4 more movies. Despite her prodigious talent as an actress, she was often relegated to playing supporting roles to white lead actresses. Though she was often given minor roles and was often unbilled, she was able to work with major directors such as Kazan, John Cromwell, and Jacques Tourneur, and with major stars such as Gary Cooper, Rex Harrison, Fred MacMurray, Paulette Goddard, Linda Darnell, and Ava Gardner. General MacArthur recovered quickly enough. In 1935, he met Jean Faircloth aboard the SS President Hoover, which was sailing to Manila. Even though she intended on traveling on to Shanghai, she disembarked with MacArthur. Despite the age difference, she was nearly 19 years younger. They began a relationship in Manila. They married in New York City on April 30, 1937, during MacArthur's trip back to the United States to build support for the defense of the Philippines. Jean's grandfather, a former captain in the Confederate Army, instilled in her a love of uniforms. This likely enamored her to General MacArthur. MacArthur described his second wife Jean as his constant friend, sweetheart, and devoted support. They had one son, Arthur MacArthur, who was born in 1938 and still alive. They were married until Douglas' death in 1964. As the years passed, things didn't go so well for MacArthur's former mistress. While living in Los Angeles, she belatedly realized that her dreams were now simply ashes. The middle-aged Cooper committed suicide by overdosing on barbiturates on June 29, 1960. She was 46 years old.
If you liked the video you just watched, then you may like these two other videos from EmersusTech.
And in the world that I knew, I didn't know about you. Chasing after the ring on the merry-go-round, just taking my fun where it could be found.
If you liked what you see, hit the subscribe button or share. Thank you. This has been EmersusTech.